Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, Comments and Answers TJ. I hope you are all doing well. In this video, we are going to prepare for the book study, Complete Testimony, for the week of November 4th to 10th. This week, we'll be studying chapter 17, paragraphs 13 to 19. So, let's get started. Questions 13 and 14, Part A. Why couldn't that violent mob stop the preaching? The mob couldn't stop the preaching because Paul and Silas hid, and the city leaders weren't convinced that the accusations were true. Additionally, Jason and other brothers posted bail to appease the authorities and were released. So, even though there was opposition, they were able to continue their work elsewhere. Additional comments. In Acts 17, 8-9, we see that although the authorities heard the accusations, they weren't really convinced that Paul and Silas were a threat. This shows us that, even when people oppose our faith, there will always be those who assess the situation carefully and aren't swayed by mere hearsay. The mob couldn't stop the preaching because Paul and Silas stayed out of sight. This reminds us that sometimes it's better to avoid conflict to continue serving God without issues. Following Paul's example, we don't need to confront those who mean us harm. Instead, we can act prudently to continue preaching. Questions 13 and 14, Part B. How did Paul follow Jesus' counsel, and how can we imitate him? Paul followed Jesus' counsel to be as cautious as serpents and as innocent as doves. This means he avoided facing the violent crowd and left so he could preach elsewhere. We can imitate him by being prudent, avoiding confrontations when possible, and finding peaceful ways to continue our preaching. Additional comments. In Matthew 10:16, Jesus advised being as cautious as serpents and as innocent as doves. Paul applied this counsel by avoiding conflict rather than facing the crowd. We can also be cautious and seek ways to avoid confrontations, focusing on continuing our mission to preach peacefully. By being cautious and not acting tough, Paul demonstrated that bravery doesn't always mean facing problems head-on. Sometimes, being prudent and avoiding conflict is a form of bravery. We can imitate Paul by avoiding situations that might cause us unnecessary problems and always seeking ways to preach without conflict. Question 15. How did the Bereans respond to the message of the good news? The Bereans responded with a noble attitude, showing great interest in the message. They listened attentively and then examined the scriptures daily to verify if what Paul was teaching was true. Their willingness to learn and verify was an example of sincerity and dedication. Additional comments. In Acts 17:10-11, the Bereans listened to Paul with interest and took the time to verify everything in the scriptures. This teaches us that we should be open to learning but always confirm with the Bible to ensure that what we hear is correct. The Bereans showed a noble attitude by not immediately accepting or rejecting the message but instead investigating it with interest. They teach us that we should take the time to study and confirm with the Bible to strengthen our faith and avoid being misled. Question 16. Why can we say that the Bereans were very noble? They are considered noble because, although the message was new to them, they neither rejected nor accepted it blindly. They listened, investigated, and ensured everything aligned with the Scriptures. They did this daily and with a humble attitude, which led many of them to believe in the message. Additional comments. The Bereans didn't just listen to the message, they studied it every day to ensure it was true. This gives us an excellent example of dedication, as they didn't settle for hearing it once but wanted to be sure that what they believed was supported by the Bible. In Acts 17:12, we see that many Bereans became believers because they investigated with interest and humility. This teaches us that when we are humble and sincerely seek to learn, our faith is strengthened. Being noble means having an open mind and being willing to learn from God. Question 17. Why are the Bereans a good example for us, and how can we imitate them even if we have been in the truth for a long time? The Bereans are a good example because they didn't settle for what they heard, they investigated and remained interested. Even if we have been in the truth for a long time, we must continue studying and strengthening our faith, allowing Jehovah to keep molding us to be better Christians. Additional comments. The Bereans remind us that, even if we've been in the faith for a long time, there's always something new to learn. In 1 Thessalonians 2:13, Paul emphasized that the believers in Thessalonica accepted God's word as true guidance, not merely human ideas. This motivates us to keep seeking counsel from the Bible, no matter how many years we have studied it. In Isaiah 64:8, we are told that Jehovah is like a potter who molds his servants. The Bereans allowed Jehovah to mold them, and we should also have that same willingness, even after many years in the truth. Let's never stop being humble or learning, as God always wants to help us improve. Question 18, Part A. Why did Paul leave Berea? What did he continue doing, and how can we imitate him? Paul left Berea because some Jews from Thessalonica came to stir up trouble. Despite this, he didn't stop preaching and continued his work elsewhere. We can imitate his example by continuing our preaching work without being deterred by opposition. Additional comments. In Acts 17:13, it mentions that the Jews from Thessalonica followed Paul to Berea to incite the crowds. This shows that the opposers were determined to stop the preaching. However, Paul didn't get discouraged, he kept going. We can imitate his example by not letting opposition make us lose heart in our work. Paul was very prudent in leaving Berea and continuing to preach in another city. We can imitate him by not confronting those who persecute us, but instead seeking alternative places or ways to preach so that nothing stops us. Question 18, Part B. What audience awaited him at his next destination? In his next destination, Athens, Paul would meet a different audience, the Gentiles. This would be a new challenge, as he would have to adapt his preaching to people with different beliefs and backgrounds. Additional comments. In Athens, Paul was going to encounter people with ideas and beliefs different from what he was used to. This teaches us that sometimes our preaching will require adaptation, as we need to understand people and their perspectives to reach their hearts. In Athens, many Gentiles were unfamiliar with the scriptures like the Jews in Berea or Thessalonica. This posed a challenge for Paul, but he was willing to try. We can learn from his example and strive to adapt to different people, being patient and finding ways to share the message in a way they can understand. Well, these have been the practical answers for this week's congregation book study. I hope this is very helpful for you, dear brothers and sisters. Sending you all a big hug, and may Jehovah bless and protect you always.